communicate with us, it would be great if you could keep your microphones off for the duration of the meeting and use the chat function at the bottom of the screen to communicate with us. If you have questions or comments that you'd like us to address, please put them into the chat. We've also received some comments and questions by email earlier today from people, and we'll do our best to address as many of those as possible. If you would like to speak, just put that in the chat also that you would like to that you'd like to speak, and I'll call on people in the order that they appear. We're going to try and keep this to an hour or so. So apologies in advance if we don't get to everything, but all of the questions and comments that have been sent to us and everything that appears in the chat will be noted, and we will certainly take everything on board if we don't manage to get to discuss everything today. So we're going to be speaking today about the sector getting back to work. We're going to speak about the prospect of reopening in terms of various areas of the sector. We're going to be speaking about income supports like the PUP and the EWSS and what's going to happen to them. We're going to speak about the ongoing discussions around basic income for artists and arts workers. And then we'll have time for questions and feedback and discussion at the end. If all of that is clear, and if it isn't, I hope it will become clear. I will pass over to Angela Dorgan, Chair of NCFA, who is just off another call talking about basic income. And Angela will provide updates on these 4 key areas of our activity, and then we'll take all of the questions and discussion at the end. Thanks, Angela.
Thanks a million, Tom. And I just wolfed 3 spoons of salad, so if anybody notices any green in my teeth, please let me know in the chat. Great to see you all. Before we kick off, I would like to acknowledge the hard work of, I'll speak for myself and I think for the others, that when we all joined around the same time, joined the NCFA in 2015-16, you know, we were told once a month, once every 2 months. We've been meeting twice a week, every week, and more in the last while. And I would just like to, on your behalf, and publicly thank my colleagues on the committee. They are literally 7 people I would go to war with for anything, and are incredibly hardworking, incredibly collegiate. I would also like to congratulate one of our members, Liz Leave O'Donoghue, on a new baby boy, and we have our first NCFA baby, Mac, and he is so cute. I'd also like to congratulate all of you for surviving the last 12 months, 14 months. We are reopening, but in real terms, none of us ever stopped working. So I'd like to congratulate you all. It hasn't been on an individual or societal level an easy time for anybody, and I want to assure you that the feedback we're getting in every meeting we have, and responses on social media as well as emails, that you as a sector have been keeping this country alive and well and sane. And I want to thank you and congratulate you on behalf of Ireland on that. And I mean that most sincerely. We have as a sector, and you have more than stepped up to the plate, and I think we have a lot to be very, very proud of in that context. I'll just get, I suppose, to, and the third most important thing, congratulations to those of you who got to the barbers and hairdressers already this week, and good luck to the rest of you who will be meeting appointments. There is a feeling of this chomping at the bit at the moment, and we were spent the last couple of weeks really seeking and digging down into clarity for our sector. To use an analogy, a chicken and an egg, there seemed to be a lot of talk about reopening, but we sought, and I think recently have gotten some clarity around, you know, it's good to reopen, but also artists need to prepare for that reopening. So we wanted to make sure that the department, the minister and others were aware of the unique challenges to our sector around coming out of this crisis, and the stages and speed that will be necessary for this crisis, while acknowledging we're still in the context of a slow opening, and we're all too aware that you know, confidence and excitement can be whipped from under us at any given time. So we're going to, as Tom say today, talk about working, talk about reopening, talk about supports, and talk around the other key area, which is, and this is about the time NCFA go to government and the government parties on your behalf and with you and with your local support and activity with our pre-budget submission. And you know, I suppose the conversations we're having over the next couple of weeks with you and today with you, we'll bring that to you for confirmation, but also one of the big items in that, in the pre-budget submission, has been universal basic income, or basic income for artists. We've been pushing that for 5 years, and we can bring you updates on that, but also have a lot to ask of you in that area as well. So I'll go through them in that order. I think Tom would prefer, and I think it's good if you could drop your questions in the chat as we go, but if we could hold all the questions, we'll deal with them all then at the end. So I'll go straight into working. We sought clarity from the department last week about, you know, we now know that galleries and museums are open. We expect information on cinemas and theatres probably in June. We're not sure if they'll open in June, but we'll certainly expect more clarity in and around the 7th of June. And what we wanted to make sure that the department and others, and other departments actually, understood that in order for you to go to an exhibition, the artist has to start working and have access to their studio. In order for you to go to gigs, musicians have to rehearse. In order for you to go to a play, that play has to be rehearsed, and it has to be peopled, and it has to be planned. So what we have been given assurance from the department is that it's now clear that anyone who needs to return to rehearsals and prepare for work can. So that theatres, art centres, studios, rehearsal rooms can open not to the public, but can open for people to make work. So what we have in the general societal is if you can still work from home, do. But we have gotten clarity that if your work is to prepare work for performance, any performance, right up until now it was for broadcast. Now we have gotten clarity from the department that if everyone who needs to record, rehearse, or prepare to make work, access studios, access an art centre as a place of work rather than a place of public, you can under COVID guidelines. We assured the department, and they can assure the Department of Health, that the entire sector has been COVID compliant since day one, and that will continue. But that's something that we wanted official clarity on, and we have gotten it. So I certainly know from a music standpoint, that's a huge relief, and kind of got a whole lot of people planning and working off the bat. So it's good to get that. In terms of reopening, the department has been engaging, and some of you I know have been doing great work in reopening conversations. I'm just seeing you there, Sheila Creevy, and the work you've done for dance. And I know that ITI and Theatre Forum and others, Fall to Ireland, the Arts Council, the Events Association, and lots of others have been contributing to various stages of reopening supports. So we understand galleries and museums and small outdoor events are happening now. We understand that pilots are planned for June or July. No, but it looks like June. Pilots for indoor and outdoor events are being talked about. We understand that we will know in and around the 7th to the 10th of June, or in and around the next announcement, that cinemas and theatres would likely be open. Nothing concrete yet, but would likely be open. And that indoor music venues are unlikely to open at that stage and will possibly be later in the year. The reopening, there is an oversight committee. A lot of these reopening things came up in the task force that NCFA contributed to. And there is an oversight group and an implementation group for all of this. we understand that Sarah Brady at the department is in constant communication with the Department of Health and NEFIT through the Department of Health, and so these reports will be made public when they're ready, but also they are forming the basis of conversations between the Department of Arts and the Department of Health, and are being used to provide, you know, in previous conversations we had with the Department of Health, and regards to NEFIT, we felt a lack of confidence on their part about the sector opening up, and we think the reports that are being prepared through the department and by all of these different organisations will prove to be enough confidence, I guess, for them, for the sector to reopen. We have, in that context, made known yours and our worry around the financial burden that some of these precautions and ideas in the implementation group and the reopening group are bringing forward, and we have been informed that that will be taken into consideration in the final report. So I suppose we'll keep an eye on that on your behalf. We understand that the oversight group for this and for basic income has been put in place, and also it will serve as the delivery group for the rest of the elements in the task force. I think it's no harm to congratulate the department and the fact that they have addressed a number of the task force items, recommendation items, and have delivered on a number of them. To help with the rollout and delivery of the rest of them, the department has put together an oversight group, and this includes for basic income for artists pilot. This same group, we believe, will kind of be overseeing and put that together, and the group will be chaired by Conor Falvey from the department, and it includes representatives from the Department of Enterprise, the Department of Finance, the Department of Social Protection, the Department of Public Expenditure, the Department of Health, the Director of the Arts Council, the representative from the County Council's Managers Association, from and I think some of my colleagues, there may be one other, I actually can't read my own writing in that situation. There's one more that I might be forgetting. So in terms of reopening, that's as much information as we have to date, but we are we're keeping an eye on it the same way we did over the last few weeks. We will call for clarity and deliver clarity to you as soon as we get it. The third item then is around supports. We have sought confirmation and from government that there won't be a cliff edge for the arts and events sectors. We have gotten assurances that until that they will look at having the PUP and EWSS supports in place for sectors who are not fully yet back to full capacity. There won't be a cliff edge in June if everybody's not open in June, and that they are open to conversations from the sector, and they are keeping an eye on us and other sectors who, depending on decisions made in the coming months and depending on outcomes and I suppose that's a frustration we feel from you, but we also got at government level, and their frustration is this is all dependent on the vaccine. You know, I sound like Tony Houlihan now, but it depends on the vaccine rollout. It depends on if numbers don't go up or down, and it's all dependent. But I suppose we would be confident that there's a far larger awareness now than there was this time last year from the instruments of government about the needs for support in our sector for artists, arts workers and arts organisations, and everybody involved, from the artists to those who present them and to those who work around them. So all artists, arts workers, events and arts organisations will be supported and are being recognised as being needed to continual support until such a time as we are back to normal, whatever that is, in terms of allowing people to be open to make a commercial, those who work in the commercial sector, that they can be, I suppose, allowed to open enough to be commercial again in their endeavours without restrictions. So that's the assurances around supports. And then the final bit, and it is a bit more complicated, and I think we will dig through this more through questions rather than us kind of being any expert on basic income, although we are now far better, more experts than we ever were, or that I know far more about it than I did 10 months ago. And so what we have been doing on basic income over the last 6 to 7 months in particular, but over the last, I suppose, 3 years, basic income has been a cornerstone of NCFA's pre-budget submission to government for the last, I think this will be our 5th year, putting it as a core element of our pre-budget submission. We ramped up our activity and knowledge and engagement in basic income when it was made part of the programme for government. We went after it really stealthily, that our sector is the sector that it should be piloted on. So as soon as a pilot was talked about at government, we pursued it as the arts being a perfect pilot for that. You are an audience, I don't need to tell why that is. It's where it's precarious sector. Its income is precarious. As a sector, we're still far below the European average, but also so much of our work is invisible work, and we always use Owen in our conversations. Owen is a very successful theatre director, but even in any given year, 40% of his work is free work. It's him working for free in order that he might work and make money. And if you think of a band writing, rehearsing, recording an album before they can sell it, a writer, an author writing a book, there's so much unpaid time there, and so many people who work in the arts that go from contract to contract. And we have always and long argued that basic income would suit the arts more than any other sector. But also in the wider context of why a pilot and why the arts for that pilot is information out of that pilot could help very similar organisations like small farmers, fisheries, and other small industries in the service sector who could benefit from the information learned and learnings from a trial in the arts. So we have been, when we worked on the task force with a number of colleagues, we relied on the decades of work that people like Social Justice Ireland and Basic Income Ireland have brought about, but we have brought to bear on it ourselves as a sector. Previously, people talk about artists as just that finite, the art maker. We are strongly in favour that it's artists and arts workers, so those who make art and those who help them to bring that to audiences. We have started a list of what we mean by that, and we think it's going to be far more beneficial to everybody concerned, both politicians and basic income groups, to learn and to know who exactly we're talking about. So we have been working over the last 7 months with, or have been acting as a resource for the Green Party policy group on basic income for artists. I suppose the top lines, to give you the top lines, we support the task force call for the amount to be 327 a week, which is how we came about that number, or how we came to that number in the task force, was that it's minimum wage, basically, and it's in and around minimum wage per week. We also think that it should cover artists and arts workers. The numbers are a tricky one. We are following three key numbers that have been brought to us. One is 55,000, and that number has been used by the Arts Council, by EY in their reports, and that would be the wide artists, arts workers, events workers, and organisations in the kind of arts and entertainment sphere, and that's the number that has been used. The challenge there is no research around that number. So that's the top number. The next real number that we've become aware of is 14,200. And those were the amounts of artists, arts workers and events workers on PUP at the height of PUP. We're a little scared of that number because, so that was the highest number in that category, but we would argue, and we have argued with those who we've been working with, that there could have been a writer or an actor whose job when they signed on PUP was a barista or a teacher. And that they may not show up in that 14,200. So we are advocating that some bit of research needs to be done around the who qualifies. And the secondary of that as well is something we'd love that's an area we'd love your help in, that list, who and what you think as a sector in the area of artists and arts workers should qualify. What are the jobs? And it's, if you have some in mind now, throw them into the chat. We'll share the list that we have come up with. It is by no means finite, and that's why we rely on you to feed us. There's a real openness in those we're talking to, that the definitions come from us, the sector. So that when this is brought to government, it has buy-in from the sector to which it is solving a problem. So it's really important that any and all ideas you have, that you feed them to us, and we can put them together on any aspect of basic income for artists. And that, so we come to a stage where we're not arguing about who can, that's a group that we've all agreed on, and we feed that then to the oversight group. They will rely on us to bring that list to them, and we're asking you now to feed into that list for us and with us. The other area then is how you qualify, and if you had any ideas there are a number of situations already. So one is the revenue definition is that you 50% of your income in the previous year would have been from your artist endeavor. That's impossible now, because the previous year here nobody earned any, very few people earned anything from their art. So we would be encouraging language like an average income over the last, and then propose an X amount of years. So we'd love to hear your thoughts there. There is also the situation where there are artists who have not yet started to make income from their arts. So what's our language around that, and what's our language about feeding into that? So we'd love to hear. That's what we'd love. We have our own ideas, but we'd love to hear from you as a sector. The solution is on this Zoom, I think, or in the wider community that this Zoom recommends. And we have been asked to feed into this group, or to be available as a resource, and to meet the department every on a regular basis to feed this into them. So we would encourage you, and any and all ideas you have that you don't see yet, that you feed them through to us. And I really think we are best placed as the sector to come up with the solutions for this sector. What we have advised is that it's not another Hunger Games for the arts, and that we're not all competitively pitted against each other, and that we're not, that it's not it's not a competitive, that because it's universal and because basic income is to answer a dire need for all artists, that it shouldn't need to be something that becomes competitive. Now, there is the counter argument coming back at us from a lot of people that the trial may need to be competitive, because a trial will need a test group and will need a pilot group who will be asked not to opt in. But I think those are all things that aren't written in stone yet, and that we have an opportunity to feed into. Social Justice Ireland just released their ideas, and they have some really useful figures. We had some observations for them on items we wouldn't agree with them on, and I've covered most of them here. But just do be aware that there's an opportunity here for us to have a positive impact on the outcome of this, and any UBI conversations or basic income conversations should come with the warning that it's not in stone yet. We have an opportunity to be the architects of this idea, and we would welcome any and all ideas you have on that, because it hasn't ever been done in Ireland. And what a you know, what a statement it would make about us that our government will put its money where its mouth has been for a long time, and acknowledge and support those in the sector who benefit Ireland in terms of selling Ireland as saints and scholars, and books coming out our ears, and, you know, poetry on the street, and music everywhere. They benefit from us as a sector. How amazing would it be if that benefit was acknowledged and supported? The final thing, I suppose, on that is the toes we have put in the water. We've been meeting, we asked to meet all the political parties. We've met all of them, bar Fianna Fáil and Social Democrats. And all of the other parties have indicated support for UBI. In theory, a lot of them want to see the drill down on the information and the who and the how, but all seem to be supported of, you know, of the if. And there's huge, we have received great support on all political levels, but also in the task force, there was huge support for basic income, that the pilot be in the arts, and that was unanimous in the task force. And in any public engagement that we've been doing thus far, there has been no actually kind of any idea that this pilot happen in the arts. We're also, to our knowledge, there is no other cohort or sector chasing being the pilot for this, the pilot that has been agreed in the programme for government. So that's by no means comprehensive. That's an overview of the work we've been done, and I suppose a pointer forward about your contribution to how this might look, or what it might look like. And then once we have a basic income pilot that we can get behind, the next problem will, or the next, not a problem, the challenge will be then, as a sector, rising to support its implementation, and to make sure we have called for it to be in that it would be, and I think the political parties have committed to as much, that it will be hopefully passed in the budget in October, and would look to start in January 22. So Tom, if you want to feed me questions.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Angela. That's really comprehensive, and you've covered a lot of the questions that have come in, but I'm going to, I'll run through them. I'm going to start actually with basic income, just because that's what we've just been talking about. I think there have been some questions about whether artists, in terms of the language of artists and arts workers being eligible. Certainly that's our position. And I know there have been different kinds of language used by different bodies that have been discussing this, but I think that's something that's important to NCFA, and how that's determined. I was interested to see Annette's comment there. There are 259 in the chat going, you know, are you actively building a career around your creative practice? Yes or no could be the eligible. And I think there's been questions about what's considered creative practice. Certainly from our point of view, we don't see this scheme as there being a separation between what might historically have been perceived creative and facilitatory. Like, it's all creative. If you're a stage technician or a sound engineer, we consider that a creative practice. Our position is that artists and arts workers of all kinds should be eligible for a scheme like this. And I guess that's the case that we're going to make. There was a question about if it's going to be a 50%, require 50% of income. There are some issues with that, as we've identified. What kind of income, arts-related income, would count, and would that include teaching, for example, or how broadly can arts-related income be counted? And there's a question about other previous criteria, like the artist's dole criteria. What was wrong with that? I guess we feel that's narrow in terms of in terms of the kind of roles that, and also the kinds of bodies that could accredit people. And actually, it led to not a very big take up on on the artist dole. So we're certainly interested in that being broader. Similarly, someone asked whether the artist tax exemption could be a qualification. Again, that's extremely narrow, and that's based on a kind of Anthony Cronin definition of what a creative artist is, which doesn't include performers or stage directors or, so I think we would be looking for something that's certainly broader than the tax exemption. There's a question here about, Angela, you might address about how basic income might work along means-tested benefits like disability allowance.
Yeah, so that's something we dug into very early on. The recommendation, it's a private document, I believe, until tomorrow, but we'll be able to share it with you on the NCFA website. The Social Justice Ireland publication today will answer a lot of that for you. What we're recommending, the recommendation for basic income is that it's non-means tested. It's a payment that goes straight into your account, and then you pay tax at 40%. So these are the recommendations. None of, and I just want to absolutely say, this isn't real yet, or it's not in law yet, and there are a number of steps have to be taken. So now is the time for the feedback, and I'm seeing some brilliant recommendation there. Megan Reardon, the Actors Fund in New York, is definitely something that the French system, I think, is another really useful system to bring to government as a recommendation, or as a best practice that's already out in the world. So the current thinking from Basic Income Ireland and from Social Justice Ireland is that it's non-means tested, and also that means that it becomes cheaper for the government than, say, an artist dole, because there's not all that administrative team and payment, but also because the other recommendation is you pay 40% on the first euro after the amount you get. So we're recommending basic income, which is 18,000. So you pay as PAYE, you pay 40% on the next euro, but also as self-employed, you pay on the next euro. On the question of arts work, yes, teaching is part of your practice. Of course it is, and any and all of that would qualify, we would think, qualify you as income. And I think there's a comprehensive list of in the Social Justice Ireland, which we'll share with you as soon as we're allowed, of all of the other benefits that people in Irish society get. The recommendation is none of those would be affected. The Social Justice recommend that basic income balance off with the idea of arts exemption or tax exemption. The amount of people that benefit that is a very narrow number. So the social justice numbers, I think, are very interesting. There's an idea that they've extrapolated the numbers of market income and then paying tax if the market income is then subsidized by a basic income for artists, and that you up to 75,000 income in any given year, you're still benefiting from being on basic income, and then it starts to cost you. So that will kind of give you an idea of the sums. They have a more defined summary today in the report that we'll share with you, where up until, if you're doing basic income, right up until 45,000, you're making more money at the end of the year, if you like. And I suppose the best way it's been described to me is basic income is cash flow to an individual. You will, because it has shown in loads of studies, is that it's almost the state paying you ahead of the income tax you'll pay on your artistic output at a later date. Because what studies show is 3 to 5 to 10 years, basic income is paying for itself, because productivity goes up, outputs go up, entrepreneurship goes up, well-being goes up, which is the far more important. So if you're struggling to get your head around it at all, that's what really tipped me into understanding the benefit of it, because we are encouraging this as an extra way of investing in the arts and not as a replacement investment. We believe bursaries and supports should have to remain in place in order for work to be made, but that the basic income for artists is to fund the worker to live. So you have your living wage, and then you have getting paid to do work. You will pay your tax on that after you get over your weekly payment. It's just you're borrowing as an artist with who makes output for sale. You're borrowing off your not borrowing, but you're being invested in off your future outcome, and that's, I think, a really useful way to maybe look at it. I also just anecdotally, it's made far more complicated than actually it needs to be. Basic income. It will end up being cost neutral if we engage with it, but I think the benefits are far, 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 societally and individually are weighed way in favor of what they might cost. And I do think that while it won't, not every single person will qualify, it is one of the most encouraging ways of supporting the most artists, arts workers and event workers that we have at all come across or been able to access or achieve in the arts, certainly in my 2 and something decades working in this sector. So I think it's in the answer to it and to the most beneficial for the most people is certainly in our sector. And the appetite is there. I think the timing is, I was listening to Sean Healy from Social Justice Ireland in the talk at 1 o'clock, giving a potted history, and so many times they were so close and it just didn't take off. And I think just all of the conversations and all of the people who want this to happen have never come together in such a way before. So it is encouraging, but it is up to us as a sector, I think, to make sure that our experiences and our lived experiences are what inform how it's rolled out. And I think we have an opportunity to do that now.
Brilliant, thanks, Angela. Just there, I have here the clarification actually that at this Social Justice Ireland meeting earlier, the question around the disability pension was, they made clear that certainly from their point of view, means tested benefits, it should be possible to earn those on top of basic income. So it's not that people with on disability pension or other schemes like that shouldn't be excluded from it, and which I think is important. There are some questions here that I think maybe we don't have an answer on, but that we can maybe look into. There's a question about, in terms of qualification, what if someone takes a career break, for example, for parenting or another reason, how might that be counted? Someone's suggesting an apprentice type scheme to help people kind of in the beginning of their careers. I think it's possibly another idea, but maybe something that we can think about down the line. A question about what if UBI takes you over the threshold where you're required to charge VAT? I think we can certainly, look into that with our financial experts. And there's other good suggestions. It's interesting here that there's a number of points being made that Visual Artists Ireland consider income of €5,000 as a professional visual artist rather than as a percentage, but actually as an amount per year. So that's something to be thought about. And this question about, just as a question there for Theatre Forum, clarifying the definition of creative practice on the pay scale survey, which we sent out the other day, and we've passed that on to Theatre Forum to hopefully clarify. We might move on, and if there are further questions about basic income, please put them into the chat, or you can follow up with us afterwards at info@ncfa.ie. But we might just, there's a couple of questions about the PUP and the EWSS. I mean, there's a question came in from someone who, after more than a year of trying, hasn't managed to get on the PUP, which is really unfortunate. I think the best advice we can give on that is to contact the Department of Culture. I would say
arts unit at,
someone might drop that email address there into the chat so that people can follow up. Our best advice is to follow up directly with the department, who have been looking into cases. And this was an example of someone who did lose a lot of scheduled work as a performer, but wasn't in the middle of employment at the point where the pandemic happened. And there's another question, which I think, I suppose, is something that we need to get clarity on, about how sporadic PAYE work may be able to operate alongside the PUP when people go back to work. And I suppose we're thinking about people like performers or technicians who are not self-employed, but who work on PAYE. As at the moment, that income is not eligible in terms of earning it on top of the PUP, as far as I'm aware. So we should just clarify, as sporadic work becomes available, and as the PUP, while the PUP continues, how can that be? How can that be? Make sure that people don't lose it. So that's something that we can certainly put on our on agenda. There's thanks. Will has just put in a artistspup@welfare.ie, which is the email address to contact welfare directly about the PUP. And there's great tax calculations going in there about the VAT issues. And the VAT is something that we can come back to again at another point. It's certainly, we've done a certain amount of work around VAT, but it's something that we can come back to. And so I might run through a bunch of quick questions that we might try and answer quickly about reopening, and the answers to these might be yes, no, or we don't know, or we look into it. There's a question here which is around classes and therapeutic sessions, so art therapeutic sessions, and are youth groups able to work? I saw there was a Marie Sherlock from the Labour Party was asking about this in the Irish Times today. And I think that's a sector that's still looking for a lot of clarity. Our understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Angela, but it is that professional work is allowed to go back, but that there still isn't clarity around amateur or voluntary or therapeutic or teaching work.
The only clear indication we have there is that that's an immediate yes if the class takes place outdoors and is lower than 15 people. There is no clarity yet, as we understand, for indoors, but if it's and this is just my interpretation, but if art centres and theatres are allowed as a place of work and not open to the public, one could make I'm not sure, it wouldn't, I think, allowed for over a certain number, or may not be allowed in, I think a class could be considered public. So I think your safest is either the class happens outside and is reduced to 15, but what we understand is that there'll be far more clarity and allowance of that in June. Now, that could be, and we're not naive, it could be, oh, we'll tell you in June just to get them, get off us kind of way. But I think certainly the safest thing there. And I suppose what we are brilliant at as a sector is knowing what we can do safely. So I think if you can make an individual safe argument, there's a lot to be said for that, but we are echoing the recommendations being made by Dance Ireland repeatedly in our conversations with the department, and I understand that those are then being made by Sarah in her regular meetings with the Department of Health.
There's a couple of there's some good things in the chat here. Sarah Bragg-Bulger from Dublin Youth Theatre has said that they've been advised to follow the Department of Education guidelines for youth arts. Sarah, if you had a link that you could throw in the chat there, that would be brilliant. But I think
it's going to be my next suggestion is follow the school's advice.
Yeah, I think our understanding at the moment is that professional work is covered by, the latest clarification. Other activities are still mostly covered by the mass gatherings rules, which is currently 15 outdoors. But I think we can go and we can look for additional clarity around this. And there's a question about non-arts venues as workplaces, churches, stately homes. Maybe that's something that we can ask for clarity about at the moment.
We can ask for clarity, but I do know that Fáilte Ireland have a really comprehensive list themselves on their website. So you could, if those areas kind of fall into tourism more than arts, I think there's some good guidelines there as well. And certainly I know the Arts Council and Tourism Ireland, because there's so much overlap, have been working very closely together on festivals and outdoor areas reopening for arts and sports. But I think there might be some resources available to you there in tourism.
But I suppose
grants available to get yourself ready.
But I think the question is more about going back and doing rehearsals and doing,
Okay.
in those kinds of like, yeah, in terms of those spaces. So maybe that's something we can also look for clarity on. Someone has just sent me through in the chat a clarification that that only professional work is currently allowed under the guidelines in art centres or rehearsal rooms, so not community or voluntary or youth work. Certainly under but we will continue to we will have this on our agenda. There's a question about whether artists can travel to or from Northern Ireland for work. My understanding is that cross-border travel for work is allowed. I don't know if anyone has more information about that you could put in the chat. But certainly I know that artists have been doing that. Maybe that can be clarified. There's a question about, will there be restrictions on numbers in rehearsal rooms? My understanding, though correct me if I'm wrong, Angela, is that the numbers, as long as the work is being done under public health guidelines with social distancing and that it's not considered a mass gathering. So the numbers are not restricted as long as social distancing and other public health measures can be maintained. There's a similar question about dance numbers in rehearsal rooms, which maybe is answered by the same thing. There's also there's some good information on the dance sector, and the guidelines have been posted in there that people can look at. So there's some questions around when we go back to venues. I guess a number of these things, the answer to this is we don't really know. Will social, but I think all of these things can go on our list of questions for the department at our next meeting. Will social distancing still be required when theatres open? Could social distancing be eliminated if all of audiences were required to be vaccinated? Will vaccine status need to be checked for artists to work together? Will vaccinated artists need to give consent to work with non-vaccinated artists? When will guideline numbers for outdoor and indoor events of various scales will be provided? All of these things are things we're trying to find out. It's a good question here about theatre bars. When the performance spaces are able to open, can the bars open? When wet pubs are able to open, will the bars open?
I suppose this is the conversation at NCFA we've been having all the time, because what we want to do was, if Brown Thomas can be open, then why not a bookshop? Or why not a cinema? If 100 people can be in TK Maxx, why can't 100 people be in the Workman's Club? I suppose these are conversations we're having all along. What we're getting is, the feeling we're getting is indoor venues for music will be last. That's the only thing we did have any kind of opinion on. And again, in any of our conversations it was opinion, not fact, because I think in the context of all societal conversations about the reopening, it's all based on if this goes right and if that goes right and if this goes right. But these are all really, really useful questions for us to just have as a long list in our communications back and forth with the department. And as and when we get answers to them, we'll put them up on our website.
Brilliant, thanks, Angela. But it's a good question. If you can have a drink in a pub, you should be able to have a drink in a theatre. Certainly, I think so. There's a question here around the pilot events that the minister has been talking about in the news, and around the criteria for those pilot events being selected. Do we have any information about that?
We don't have any knowledge on that. We only have what the minister is saying is that some pilots are planned. We don't have any access to who and how and when. I do know that she has publicly stated that the larger events they'll be working with large promoters, and for smaller events they'll be working with venues. And those who represent them, but we don't have any concrete information, but we're hoping that we'll have some level of input so that everything is tested for all of us, so that we would have some level of input from the sector into what goes into the test and what's measured in the test, so that it's of benefit to everybody in the sector, and not just those involved in the tests.
Brilliant. Thanks, Angela. There's a question here. Maybe Georgina, I could ask you to speak to this if you're still here with us. About the guidelines for galleries opening. Is there a document that people can look to?
There's not an updated document at the moment. It's still referring to the Fáilte Ireland guidelines that have been available, that you're able to sign up to be part of that safety charter, which it is advised that everybody does. And then I know the Arts Council have been updating the kind of art centres guidelines. So I think that's another really good reference, which is available on the Theatre Forum website. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Those guidelines are being updated on the Theatre Forum website. Obviously, those guidelines and most of the guidelines that have been produced refer to the level 1 to 5, which our understanding now is that those levels have been abandoned, and that the kind of various guidelines for various sectors will be developed. Probably, I imagine some things will look like they do in the guidelines, but like the sector is not going to open exactly as the guideline, as those levels are anymore. So I think we need to, any of those reopening, until there's further clarity about literally what's possible when, that we shouldn't be relying on the levels from now on. There's a couple of comments and questions coming in here in the chat that I might just draw attention to. At the moment, capacity is still based on 2 meters social distancing. We will find out when we do, I guess, if that's being reduced. Apparently, I just hear here that the Arts Council and the department are working together on the mid-scale pilot events and are already in contact with a number of companies or producers. So I don't think this is going to be an open application thing. And this may be some things that are already happening, potentially in a streaming context that they're going to look to put audiences into. The Theatre Forum guidelines there have just been posted for creating work and for our art centres. Irma's just put those in the chat, so thank you so much. A clarification on what constitutes a music venue and what constitutes a theatre venue. Of course, there are many venues that have overlap. I suppose when we say
there, Tom, I think certainly with the Olympia from Kane there, I think the main difference there would be seated and unseated. That a lot of music performances in the Olympia are standing. But the theatre are more like, not all, but are more likely to be seated. So I would say that's what they're using. But all of these questions are really, really, really useful for us to gather together under headings and get clarity for them. Because, I mean, this is, I suppose, the reopening guidelines that we asked to be made available to the sector as we reopened, and we did think, that the reopening guidelines that are being brought together, it's a bit disappointing that the studies are really clear on what you can do, and the reopening guidelines are really clear on what you can do at level 1 to 5, and just when that became clear, the government themselves stopped referring to the reopening in those levels. So that just made it all so confusing in terms of what we can. So what we'll work to do is interpret the allowances there, and hopefully between us come up with some kind of clarity for that you can find yourself in those answers. But we'll take all of those out and put them together and try and get clarity as early as we can. I think a lot of them will be as we have gotten thus far, which we'll know more in June.
Brilliant, thanks, Angela. There's a question about Ace Donna being a system for the UBI. I guess one of the tricky things about Ace Donna is that it is very limited as to who can get in and that people have to be elected. But of course, it is clear that the only requirement is that you're working full-time as a creative and your income is less than a certain amount. So I think all of these things are things that we can take into account. I'm just looking through here to see if there's anything else. So production spaces for visual arts are currently open, but with social distancing guidelines, like the Fire Station and the National Sculpture Factory. Dance Ireland are open for residencies and rehearsals from this week. There's a question about residencies. My understanding is that residencies, if they're in arts venues, can now happen. People are able to go to work. The guidelines are as they are for all the other sectors. If you can do the work at home, you should do the work at home. If you're not able to do the work at home, you can now go into the venue and the venue can open. There's a point here about the system in the UK where you have to prove that you're disabled enough to get disability allowance, and hopefully we won't have to prove that you're arty enough to get a basic income as an arts worker. So again, you know, we'll yeah, certainly we want it to be as open as possible. Is there any indication that our government are liaising with colleagues internationally about reopening, which is already happening? I'm not sure, but we can certainly ask them to take note. There's a question about the PUP. How long will it accept new applicants? At the moment, that says until the 30th of June, but I guess, you know, every time the PUP has been extended, they have also extended the possibility to apply for it. So I hope there will be more clarity around that in June about what's going to happen. The question about who has received decisions on bursary applications this year, we don't know. I've seen the literature ones, people celebrating getting literature bursaries on Twitter, but that's all. That's not something that I suppose that's not an issue that's been on that has been raised with us, but it's something that we can check when we're in touch with the Arts Council. That sort of seems to me, let me just run down to the bottom here. In terms of site-specific or promenade work indoors, can we get clarity around audiences and what protocols would be required? I think that's a useful, you know, that might be something that's more like going into galleries, like if you're walking around. And so but we can ask for clarity about that. How will children be treated as audience members if audience members are required to be vaccinated? I think that's a big thing that we are going to need to, you know, find clarity about. What will the vaccination requirements be, and what will the requirements that will be put on the public, and what will they be put on the venues?
And we understand that's a conversation happening at all levels of society and not just in the arts. That seems to be the feedback we were getting, is that is happening at every layer of activity in society.
Yeah, great. And I think, yeah, it's probably maybe is useful to try and to maybe help the department shift the thinking around venues, because of course lots of music venues are seated, like classical music is seated. And I think, you know, I think there's a, you know, one of the things that we get the sense is that like public health thinks that like theatre is so exciting that like when you go, the audience kind of go bananas and like social distancing goes out the window, whereas which doesn't happen at the cinema. You know, it's interesting that anytime I've been at the cinema last year when it reopened, everyone had their masks off and they were eating and drinking. And anytime I was at the theatre, people were sitting with their masks on in a line. So I think, you know, certainly one of the things we've talked about at meetings is that like as things become allowed in society, like for example, sitting across a table from other people with masks off, shoving burgers and beers into your face. Like once that's allowed, we should be able to try and make a good case for sitting politely in a line with a mask on. But you know, these conversations are ongoing, and I guess, yeah, there's, you know, we have a commitment from the department that we'll have a conversation with them every 2 weeks. Temperature checking, is this going to be in place, and what happens when people get the winter flu?
That's an interesting one. There's also conversations happening, I believe, at Health at the moment that masks may become mandatory every year now in flu season, even when we're all vaccinated. And I suppose there's an element in some of these, we will take them all to all of our conversations, but there's an element in all of these that once we ask them for the first time, we'll get more used to them being normal. But also I think there were very useful notes in there from you to each other. For instance, Sheila Creedy has put up that if you put up, you know, if you are doing any dance rehearsals and stuff, that they have criteria that you post outside the rehearsal room. And I know that you know, Theatre Forum and ITI have recommendations as well. So go to your own resource organisation so that if you do have an activity, you're posting the COVID guidelines as appropriate in the place where you're doing the work. But I think that's something you're all doing anyway.
Brilliant, thanks, Angela. Just a quick thing about There's a question about quarantining and the fact that it seems like there's an expectation, or there's a certain sport that, athletes which are considered elite athletes have exemptions from hotel quarantine, whereas artists or arts workers don't have a similar exemption. This is something that we've brought up, and there seems to be a real reluctance to waive the mandatory hotel quarantine. They kind of make the point that like people who are traveling to repair ventilators or like fix machinery that's used to make the vaccine have to do hotel quarantining, so that they don't want to make special treatment for opera singers. But you know, that's something that's going to continue to be on our agenda. Obviously, the hotel quarantine issue will become reduced when more people are vaccinated and then don't have to hotel quarantine. But just to let you know that is something that we have been trying to work on. But there doesn't seem to be much movement around that for now. We're just kind of at the end of our time. If there are any really burning questions that someone would like us to address, if you could fire it into the chat now, and that includes if there's something that you've asked already and I've missed it, and you want to put it in there. I'm just going to keep my eye on the chat.
And when we're doing that, I'll just... Oh, sorry, love.
No, go on.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as your final questions are coming in and as we wrap up, I just want to say thanks again to all of you for your contributions and your work, and do email. It's really, really useful for us if you can email info@ncfa.ie with any and all questions you have, concerns you have. We'll try and capture as much as we can on the chat today, but it's really useful for us just to have a record of this and make sure we don't miss anything. That if you have any ideas around UBI, if you have any sectoral specific questions that you can't find the answers to, we'll be happy to put them all and to continue to work. We'll be calling on you a lot as UBI gets discussed, for support, for pushing it with your local politicians, for interrogating it as useful or otherwise for the sector, and we'll be relying on you. We are only your voice, so we'll be relying that in order for us to not miss anything, that you do any ideas at all that you have, that they'll come to us. And I want to just thank all of you for your amazing work, and again thank my colleagues, and especially Tom. You are Rain Man when it comes to these kind of events. You're so superb, you're so inclusive, and you don't miss a trick. I really don't know how you coordinate nearly 200 people. So total hats off to you, and thanks to all of you for your continued work and support as well.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Angela. And thank you everyone for everything that you do. A couple of final questions here coming in. Will vaccination certs be required for employment contracts? That's something we can certainly look for. That's something that I guess the arts won't be unique in this. There's a question about if you didn't apply for the PUP or get the PUP, would that affect you when it comes to basic income? It shouldn't at all. They're not connected. There's a whole load of thank yous coming in. Thank you so much for being with us. A couple of final thoughts. If just in terms of helping us to put together a list of as broad as possible, a list of artists and arts workers in various fields that we think should be eligible for the scheme, if you could email us at info@ncfa.ie, please let us know, and we'll use that to put as comprehensive a list as possible together. If you need to contact us about anything, please use that email address. As Angela said at the beginning of the meeting, we will be heading into our annual round of our pre-budget submission and meetings with politicians. Obviously, we've been meeting with arts spokespeople and with party leaders, but we will need every single TD around the country to hear about the NCFA's wants and needs before the discussions for the budget will happen. So we will be in touch as those things develop. If you are interested in becoming a little bit more involved with NCFA in your local area, please email us at info@ncfa.ie, and we will be contacting all of our current local coordinators, and also anyone who is interested in being a little bit more involved in your local area, and we'll be putting everyone together over the next little while so that we can really be ready to hit the ground in the summer and make sure that that all of the politicians know what's important. I think last year, really showed the immense impact that can happen when we have this collective national conversation between artists, arts workers, arts organizations, arts audiences, and politicians about the importance of the arts. #SaveTheArts, was something that everybody understood, and the arts still #needs to be saved. So we're going to continue to be trying to #SaveTheArts as the year goes on. Thank you. The recording will be available. We will put it on the NCFA website, and we will share the link on our social media and through the newsletter. I'd encourage everyone also to fill out the pay scale survey that we're working on with Theatre Forum and AIST and other resource organizations. The link was sent out in the newsletter on Monday. And if you are not subscribed to the NCFA newsletter at the moment, you can do that through the website. And we'll send another link to that before the end of the week, along with maybe some of the links that have come up in the chat today. We've recorded the meeting, so we will provide a transcript for artists with disabilities. We were talking before the meeting about getting otter captioning set up, and apologies that we haven't gotten around to doing that so far, but from now on we will be working to make our meetings as accessible as possible, but we will make the transcript of the meeting available along with the recording. Thanks. We seem to have got through everything. Thanks so much. With that, thank you for taking this time this afternoon. All the best with everything that you're doing. All the best with getting back into your studios and your rehearsal spaces and your places of work, and planning and creating and preparing and rehearsing the work that we're all going to be experiencing from now on. Get out there and see art in galleries and museums as you can. And take advantage of them being open. I had a really great day wandering around galleries in Dublin yesterday, and I feel all the better for it. We look forward to being in indoor and outdoor performance spaces with many of you as the summer rolls on. So thanks so much, and we'll be in touch, and please be in touch with us. Thanks a million.
Thanks all.
Thanks a million. See y'all soon. Lovely to see you, Angela.
And you.
Yeah, hopefully see you in real life very soon. Thank you, everybody.
Love it.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Have a great Wednesday.